the San Carlos City Council Redevelopment Agency meeting of Monday, February 14th, 2005 to order. Could you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 2 is changes to the order of the agenda. Do any of my council members have any changes?
Yeah, I wanted to suggest a change with items 6A and B to just reverse those so that we look at the report on consultant interviews first and then the report from the Human Resources Director second.
Actually, you know what, they originally were that way, and I switched them to the other way so we could go through the city manager process first, if that would be okay.
Well, let me give the reason then. The reason is because in part of our recommendation on the recruitment for strategic planning, we have that as at least an option to look at coordinating those two and or which do we do first.
Mike, do you want to?
Well, we did, but I think Matt's right. Why don't we just talk about the envisions first? I don't think it will contradict because
Okay.
it is an option. We want the council to know we considered it.
Black Mountain Water.
And then found the job skills to be contradictory, really.
Okay.
7E?
So we'll change the order of 6A and B. Does any staff member have any changes to the order of the agenda?
No, Madam Mayor.
Anyone from the public? Okay. Council reports. The first thing I would like to report is that tonight the City Council interviewed applicants for our Citizens Advisory Committee, which is going to be looking at the evaluations of athletic turf needs here in San Carlos, and would like to let you know who we've decided to appoint to that. The committee will be comprised of representing neighborhood groups: Greg Harris, Jeff Grace, John Voorhees, Michael Gibbons, Rachel Sismore, and then representing the parent community will be Raymond Morala, Michelle Mojas, and Rod Lair. Representing the adult population with children not at home will be Jim Lukes and Bob Daner. And then there were also recommended appointments from our Parks and Rec Commission, school representatives, athletic sites advisory council, youth representatives, Measure G co-chairs, and city council. And actually I have a list that I will be providing to the city clerk rather than read all of those names. And then if I could, to my fellow council members, please be thinking about, we need to have 2 council member representatives on that committee as well. So if you're interested, please send me a voicemail message. Second, 3B. Matt, this is let me actually just introduce it really quick, a discussion of a letter that Matt is suggesting that we send to the Airport Roundtable regarding noise monitoring devices.
Yeah, as the representative from San Carlos that sits on the Airport Roundtable, I was also part of the subcommittee of the Roundtable that looked at our work program for the year. This was back in 2004, and one of the things we looked at was the placement of what they call noise monitors. They have some that are permanent, and most of them are up in San Francisco, and then they have a group that are portable, and it's the first time we've gotten portables actually from the vendor, and they will be placed around the county at various sites for a couple weeks at a time per quarter. And I put in a request that San Carlos be considered, and it was agreed that we would be. And then I had a meeting with Bert Ganong at the site that was looked at in San Carlos, which is it's what I think of as Belmont Water District site. I think it's called something else now besides Belmont Water, but it's on Shelford. It's up on a hill. Bert liked it because of the fact that it was secure, it's fenced in, and so forth. So I asked staff to put together a letter just formalizing our request, and then also talk to Belmont, because it's close to the Belmont border, about Belmont being a part of the request as well. So they've taken their action, and then we have this letter here, which I did call city staff earlier and asked if this the last sentence of the first paragraph could be deleted, because we've already been through that process of working with the airport roundtable on the matter.
Yeah, actually, what Matt's referring to is the location at Shelford. I actually, since the letter's coming from me as mayor, actually was looking to see if actually Shelford is the best location in terms of monitoring noise for all of San Carlos, because my understanding is that we get sort of one request at this, and I'm sure that it may be that Shelford is the best, but since it's on such the far north side of town, I thought perhaps they may have a location like at the water tower up at the top of Melody that may prove to be more centralized and more representative of the actual noise within San Carlos from the airport. So that's why I actually had purposely asked that Mr. Ganong from the Noise Abatement District could sort of work with us to help identify what the best site is. Because, in looking at actually even at Belmont's letter, it's not a shared request. Belmont is simply supporting our request to have a monitoring device placed. So that was my reasoning.
Okay. I guess we'll see how they respond.
So you want a motion to move the letter?
Well, I just, since it's going to go out really from the council, I would assume, we should just have some consensus about this. I don't know that it requires a motion.
Okay.
Straw vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
Good? Okay. Opposed? All right. Other council reports?
I have a couple of other things, but
Tom, do you want to start?
go ahead.
I'll pass, thank you.
Okay. Nat?
I read in the Chamber newsletter about the assessment on the Industrial Road, and I was happy to see that it has been reduced. But the reason I bring it up is because I was hoping we would receive, before that went out, a final report from staff on the Industrial Road, which we've never received. The last one we received was 4/26/04, and I did look up the minutes from that, and there was a statement that we would receive a final report.
Actually,
on
Matt,
that
you know what?
project.
It was supposed to be on tonight's agenda,
Oh,
and
okay.
I pushed it back. So there is a staff report coming with the final numbers. Mike, do you want to?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and if I might answer for the council at large, the information provided to the Chamber was provided by a council member, not by staff, and the staff has not commented yet publicly because it's improper. Well, we wouldn't do that until it got to the council.
Okay.
Obviously, council can offer any speculations you would like.
Okay, so we have that coming. Very good. And then the second thing I wanted to bring up, I got a call from someone who's an attorney, lives in San Carlos, and works for the state. And they had taken note that in our municipal code, it allows for the finance director to make purchases of property for the city up to $50,000, the disposal of property, and also contracts with consultants and so forth. And the issue was that at the state level anyways, if you're involved with the state, a consultant cannot sign contracts, dispose of property, and so forth, do these things as a consultant. It has to be done by a state employee. They can make a recommendation, they can advise, they can do all those things, but they can't actually take the action. And so I wanted to pose the question tonight and hand it over to Bob. I could write you up a memo or something, Bob, on this. If we could look into how that works for us, because with our municipal code, we allow that with the finance director, but the finance director is actually a consultant, so we may have some, it's a minor issue, but it might be something we need to look at in how our municipal code is written. That's it.
Okay.
Go ahead, Don.
Two things, Madam Mayor. One is sitting in for Councilmember King at the CCAG meeting last week.
Don, do you want to speak into your mic?
Turn it on.
Turn it
Or turn it on? That'd be good, too.
Sorry about that. At the CCAG meeting last week, there was was a report on what was called a local service program evaluation, which is basically an independent party took a look at shuttle buses, such as Scoot up and down the peninsula in such cities as Menlo Park, Foster City, Burlingame, Millbrae, East Palo Alto, Half Moon Bay, and San Carlos. And it was interesting that in that report that compliments were given to Scoot for anything from its catchy name, for the email, the telephone hotlines, for actually making a difference in terms of level of service on the streets, increase in participation at the youth center, and interestingly enough, in terms of the cost of operation per hour, which is one of the measuring ways they did it, we were distinctively on the low side. Foster City and East Palo Alto were significantly higher. We were down on the low end with Millbrae, Menlo Park in that vicinity. So it was a nice little independent sort of a thing that would come out. I felt good about that. Secondly, Madam Mayor, you asked me to look into some recent events and kind of give a report and a recommendation back to the council. These events revolve around Mr. Garvey, our city manager's tendering of his resignation on the 27th of January. Subsequent to that, Vice Mayor Grocott issued a press release and made some comments. And subsequent to that, that particular press release prompted Madam Mayor to respond publicly with her reaction to Mr. Grocott's comments. And all of this is, I suppose, great fodder for a press that seemingly increasingly is interested in controversy and scandal and all that, most of which is baloney in San Carlos, I think. But nevertheless, I've taken this to heart, and I've looked at all sorts of stuff, from all the press releases to the newspaper articles and the opinions written and the emails and anything in writing that I could gather just to get a full look at it. And I've also spoken with legal counsel to see if there were any apparent violations. I understand that since this initial letter of resignation from Mr. Garvey and since the opinions were expressed, that certainly Mr. Garvey has spoken with Mr. Grocott and the mayor has spoken with Mr. Grocott also. I think all parties have generally expressed their thoughts. They have appropriately rendered apologies, and I think, as far as I can tell, whatever harshness may have been come out of that is, I think, behind us all, and I think that's the good part about it. In talking with the city attorney, he is telling me that, as far as he can tell, there are no, from a legal standpoint, no violations of the Brown Act that happened at that particular point in time. I also wanted to take a look at it from the standpoint of our relatively newly adopted Code of Ethics, and with specific regard to the words spoken or released to the press. In my humble opinion, some of the remarks made were what I will candidly call perilously close to going over the line in terms of what we think we ought to be all about, or at least what I think we ought to be about, having been on that ethics committee and having, I guess, being the senior person on this council here. Perilously close in the sense that our decorum among council in terms of what we say to each other regarding personnel matters, or what we say to anyone else regarding personnel matters in a closed session, in terms of the general tenor and the tone of public comments, or whether said or implied, that relate to city business. I think that we need to probably use this as a lesson, in as much as this is kind of the first instance where something has really come up since we've adopted this code. It would be my preference to use this as treat it as a learning experience, to put the matter behind us, and to that end, I would recommend that basically, given what I've just stated here in terms of legalities, in terms of the circumstances and what's happened since, that essentially this matter is now closed. As far as I'm concerned, I would recommend that to the City Council also.
Thank you, Don. Just as a bit of background, I actually, under a Code of Ethics policy, any perceived violations, the process calls for it to come before the mayor to do an investigation. And since I was involved in it as well. I left a voicemail message actually for Don Eaton requesting that he do it, or if he was unwilling to do it, I would have appointed another council member. But Don, I appreciate your comments, and it's very sage advice, I think, to all of us. So,
And incidentally, other than the voicemail you said, wherein you asked, will you do it, and my response to you of yes in the voicemail, I spoke with no other council members either, by the way, just so you know.
okay, thank you. Any other council reports, Don?
No.
No. Mike? I just have one very briefly. Don and I sit on our 2+2 committee, which is 2 members of the City Council and 2 members of our school district. And the purpose of that committee is actually to discuss areas where we might mutually either share facilities or share ideas or build community. And so we had one of our meetings last week, and we talked about a couple of issues, but really just nothing was decided and no action was taken. We're going to be meeting again in April, hopefully at that point. Obviously, they're very interested in the athletic needs assessment committee that's been formed and are interested in staying active in that. So we'll be able to give them an update on that. And at that point as well, the Scoot election for the parcel tax of $59 will have been had, and the decision will be out so that they'll know whether or not they need to tell the parents to make alternative transportation arrangements to and from the schools, or whether or not Scoot will be able to operate in the upcoming school year. So
I would just only add that a lot of people may not know what this committee is all about. It's been in existence for, I think, over 10 years now, and it provides a very, I think, very good means of communication with our brothers and sisters, so to speak, on the school board. They represent essentially the same taxpayers, the same people that we represent, but they have a different hat to wear. And sometimes it's actually possible to get sideways, and I know a lot of towns actually do get sideways between city councils and school boards. And because of these efforts to just sit down and talk about things and communicate, and here's what we're about, how can we help you, and vice versa. We've had an outstanding relationship with the school board, and I'm sure that that's going to keep up.
thank you, Don. Next item on tonight's agenda is public comment. Persons wishing to address the council on items not on the posted agenda may do so at this time. Each speaker is limited to 2 minutes, and speakers that are representing organizations who require more time are requested to speak at the end of the meeting. We do have another public comment period at the end of the meeting, and this public comment period is actually a 10-minute maximum period of time. And I have actually 1, 2, 3 speaker requests for public comment. First is John Guthrie.
Good evening. My name is John Guthrie. I live at 995 Buckland Avenue. I've been in public service for 30 years now. I've been in senior executive positions for 25 of those 30 years. I've worked for the 4 largest local governmental agencies in the Bay Area. I'd like to say in that time I've worked for 65 different elected officials such as yourselves, and I'd like to say I've seen everything. I'd like to say I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. But nothing I've seen prepared me for what I saw 2 weeks ago on Saturday morning when I saw the article about the city manager leaving city service. For the record, I know neither Mr. Garvey nor Mr. Grocott. I did meet Mr. Grocott once, I guess, when he showed up at my porch and asked for my vote. And I remember thinking at the time that he didn't understand the local issues, and I thought he did be a little naive, but I thought he was well-intentioned, and so I voted for him anyway. Well, his comment in the article really took me off the illusion of being well-intentioned. I know that you're trying to make peace, and I appreciated your comments, but I want to put the elephant back in the room for a second. One city attorney I used to work with told me it's a felony to disclose issues from closed session. I don't think I quite believe that. And I'm not even sure if Mr. Grocott has broken any laws, but what he has done is he's compromised this entire council's Brown Act privacy privileges. Now, let me give you an example of that. The question the public is asking now is, was this council responsible for Mr. Garvey resigning? Did Mr. Grocott have support from other council members? That wasn't clear in the article. Is Mr. Garvey leaving on his own volition? We don't know that, but as the public, we are now one step closer to moving for discovery to find that out. So by making his comments, Mr. Grocott has compromised all of your executive privilege. He also hasn't made it any easier for you to get a good local candidate to replace Mr. Garvey. In my public service career of 30 years, I have never seen an elected official directly quoted from closed session. To be honest, I've seen anonymous leaks, but I've never seen a comment like that. And I think Mr. Grocott's comments was ill-advised, inappropriate, and petty. If he didn't like Mr. Garvey, he should have acted mature and just kept quiet. He wasn't compelled to say something nice. He just didn't have to say anything. But by making his public remarks, he showed that, in my opinion, a mean-spiritedness and a cheap political opportunism. Well, so much for his being well-intentioned. He now can claim that he has a notch in his gun for getting rid of the city manager, and all of you are enjoined from refuting that because you further compromise your Brown Act privileges. To the other council members...
You're getting up on your time. Are you almost...
I'm almost done.
Okay.
I've seen elected officials like Mr. Grocott before. I call them contrarians. They can create controversy, they can create bad press, they can create discordance on the public body as he has with his council. They seem to have an uncanny knack for getting press at the expense of everybody else on the board. My advice to all of you is he doesn't play well with others. He cannot lead. Contrarians never do. They're cynics. They can't generate political consensus. My advice to all of you is you don't have an obligation to make him your next mayor. You can change that. You don't owe him anything, and you need to give him time for him to mature before you give him that selection.
Okay.
Thank you.
Time's up. Thank you. Andre? I'm sorry. I can't read his last name.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is André Carpio. I live in Emeryville, 1264 Ocean Avenue. And I have sent, I believe, to everybody's email a letter. I don't know if you all have got it. Did you? Who didn't get it? Did you, Mr.? Have you got it? Through your email? Mm-hmm. You got it? Okay. I also send handwritten one to Miss Christine Boland there. I don't know if you all got it. It's slightly different. The difference is in the spelling. The reason I come here is because 10 months ago my solar car was stolen, and I was addressing the city council meeting where Mr. King was then the mayor, and I never got any answer. I never got any follow-up, and it took about 6 months, or even more than that, to finally get the result of a police report, which is inaccurate. And on account of this inaccuracy, I haven't been able to get my car back, and I have missed a race in Japan, I have missed a race in Greek for the Olympics, I've missed the exposition in Paris, I've missed 4 events. These events are for me extremely important because the car, as I said it in the letter, has my invention, the in-wheel suspension, and only that car has it. And without the car, then I'm deprived of the opportunity to promote the system and to exploit it. I have had contact with the Dutch, but that's not enough. They want to see and they want to be able to test the system. I have made other system on a prototype and one with a stand for solar car, but this is not my car, and I want my car. As a result, I have consulted with my legal counsel, and basically this is what it amounts to. Every minute that ticks, it will increase the damages that I'm going to file a claim against the city. You would have to do something about that real soon, because the city is liable to the inefficiency of the police department. The police department, I was told, advised me of civil remedy. But the civil remedy, unique with the contract clause, belong to the person who does not have any paper. And I'm the owner. I have the pink slip and I have all the history. I'm the owner of the car since day one, which is September 1999. And I cannot be deprived any longer of my solar car.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I really wish that you would take into consideration what I'm saying without pressing any further strong legal action.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I can't hear. I'm sorry. And
Jeff-
your machine doesn't work either.
Oh, okay. If you could let him know that we'll refer this back to the police. No?
They're going to refer this to the police department.
So we'll get some follow-up from that. Clint Miller?
Clint Miller, 2429 San Carlos Avenue. Just one question. When you were talking about the Code of Ethics, it was referred to as the adopted Code of Ethics. I did miss one meeting, but has it been adopted or is it? It has been.
Yes.
Okay, great. I think
Back
that,
in September, I believe.
okay, I was away in September. Okay,
Okay.
great. I guess before leaving that subject, I'd like to say that I appreciate Don's remarks. I think it's wise to put this behind you. I'd also like to say that it was a very embarrassing episode for everybody, and I hope you will keep that in mind. All of you will keep that in mind. It really should not have happened, but I think it's wise to put it behind you. Secondly, what I really came to talk about was just to ask a question. Twice, I think in the last 6 months or so, at least the most recent example was in 4 meetings ago. You were asked about reimbursement expenses paid to Parviz Mukhtari for telephone, mileage, etc., meals, and we were told that this was going to be looked into, and I perceive that, we've seen this before. This kind of goes into the black hole, and we never hear about this again. Are we going to hear something about resolution, or at least some information on why this is occurring? And based on his contract, he should not be getting reimbursement.
Well, thank you for the reminder, Clint. We'll refer it back to staff and ask staff to follow up on that, and probably either send out a written report to us, or we'll put on a future agenda.
Okay, so we're not going to go away on this. It's being tracked.
Okay.
Thank you.
Barbara Patterson?
Good evening. I'm Barbara Patterson, 801 Walnut Street. I have a lot more confidence in the afternoon than I do in the evening coming over here. But I did want to raise some of the issues that I sent you some written material about this week. And some of the issues have to do, well, they all have to do with the water. I'm glad it's raining now. The frogs and ducks are very happy that it's raining, but it causes problems
Barbara,
for us.
may I ask a question?
Sure.
You sent us written reports on the 800 Britain project, which is on our agenda this evening.
No, I sent on the flooding, 2-page thing on the flooding. It was an email attachment.
Okay.
Yes, and I did send you
I'm
one
sorry.
on
Yeah,
that.
I was. Okay.
Yeah, this is a non-agenda item.
Okay. Thank you.
The first item has to do with the fact that I would like these to be considered as task force or agenda items taken seriously by the council, because I've come in at least 4 times and spoken about these issues. One of them has to do, obviously, with the flooding and the rain runoff. There are things that can be done within our communities that would minimize or at least reduce the amount of runoff from the rain. One of them, I'm noticing the increasing size of the buildings that are being put downtown in the flood-prone areas. Single-family homes are being replaced by huge buildings. I'm calling them huge 3-story apartment buildings with garage underneath, a full roof line, full driveway, full walkways. The areas are almost totally paved, and all of that water runs right into the street. This is going to be an increasing problem that we really ought to take a look at. This is something that can be avoided. The other item is setting the buildings too low of an elevation in the area east of Elm Street. And I did talk with a hydrologist who had told me that he even advised the people before the Laurel Arts building was built that that building should be elevated. It wasn't elevated. Now we have flooding and an expensive fix. So some of these things can, with some more careful planning and more forethought, avoid problems that become expensive, because the city then has to pay for these flooding problems. The other is the riparian setback ordinance.
So we have about 1 more minute, so.
That's fine. I just have 2 more issues.
Okay.
The riparian setback ordinance, this has been given an exception about 4 times in the last few months, not with an EIR, simply with a negative declaration. But sometimes with mitigation, I never know what the mitigation really is. Is it money or a fee, or what is it? I'd like to think there might be a policy given to the Planning Commission, because they're unclear. They keep getting these projects presented to them that are exceptions, and they wonder, is there a regulation or is there not? And at the 800 Britain project, the Planning Commission, they voted for it, but they said this is a problem for us. We don't know why we're being asked to give this exception. The other item is the possible recharging of the water table within the city. A lot of that rain can be harvested through catchment plans, water management plans that directs the rainwater, which is a resource, back into the groundwater. This groundwater could be used to recharge our water table and possible reuse of the wells, the many wells that exist in the city. And that's all I have to say for now.
Great.
I would like to say, though, that I do support Matt Grocott, and I think he would make a fine mayor. And it was an embarrassing situation in the newspaper.
Thank you.
On all parts.
Before we actually move into the approval of the consent calendar, I wanted to give Mike Garvey, our city manager, an opportunity to introduce our new chief of police, Greg Rothfuss, who was sworn in this morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. As you know, we've been through a process. We have done a recruitment. It was, in theory, interstate. We receive applicants from throughout the state and different parts of the country. A little bit difficult to wind our way through that. In the end, we actually wound up with 5 extremely well-qualified candidates, which gave me the delightful problem of trying to decide which of those would best suit the city. I also would like to make clear, I find it hard to believe some people thought I might have hired someone without telling him that I was leaving, and Chief Rothfuss was among the first to know that that was in the plans. So he's already shown that he can keep a secret, as well as all the other skills we knew that he had. And so with that in mind, we did negotiate an arrangement. I've appointed Greg Rothfuss to be our new chief of police. Greg has over 20 years of experience in law enforcement. He started in San Carlos, left us as a sergeant, one of the younger sergeants in our history, and he left to become a commander in the city of Hercules. Dramatic step up in rank for him at a time when we had no promotional positions to offer. And then later he took a position in Menlo Park, where he has served as a commander for over 7 years. I could tell from the grief expressed by the chief of police and the city manager in Menlo that we certainly had an outstanding candidate, and I was very pleased to be able to make the appointment. Greg lives in town, and as you know, he actually was on the Economic Development Advisory Commission for one term a few years back, so some of you knew him as a citizen who had applied and been appointed to a commission. Today is Greg's first day on the job. We had a nice ceremony this morning where we presented the badge and swore him in, and today's his first day. I'd like to ask Greg to come up and say a few words so that you could get a feel for our new chief of police.
Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, it is great to be home. I started my career here in San Carlos, as Mike said, about 20 years ago. I've had a lot of experiences since I started my career, but I think the defining moment for me as a police professional was here in San Carlos, where I started. I had some strong training officers and good sergeants who kept me on the right track early, and as a chief, I intend to do that with my officers here in the department, to keep them on the right track early. I have greatly enjoyed my time in the city of Hercules and with Menlo Park. I think it's broadened my experience, and it really gives me a lot of background to come back and to serve San Carlos. I have a unique ability, I think, because I live here, I know the community, but I've been outside and I have some other perspectives. So I do want to thank the staff here. It was a great swearing in today, and city staff helped plan that. It was an exciting day for me, and I'm very pleased to be back, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Greg, on behalf of my fellow council members as well as the citizens of San Carlos, welcome home.
Thank you
We're
very much.
glad to have you. Okay, next item is consent calendar items. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine in nature and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. Any consent calendar items removed, gentlemen? I and, I'm sorry, J? And J. Okay, is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve items on the consent calendar 5A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and K. And I believe I need to read
You need to read E and F.
E is adoption of ordinance number 1353, amending San Carlos Municipal Code Title 10, parking enforcement for holidays. And item F is adoption of ordinance number 1354, amending the San Carlos Municipal Code, deleting section 10.32.380A, parking for sale purposes.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Christine?
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember King?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes. Okay, Matt, 5I, which is concerning, oh, I'm sorry, Tom, concerning the authorization issuance of a request for proposal for cost of service allocation and impact fee studies.
Yeah, just a clarification as to what all this is about. As I read it, there are actually 3 studies where in the past we really dealt on the overhead cost allocation review. And perhaps staff can give me an update as to what we're doing and why we're doing it different than we have. The secondary question is what would be the cost of doing this? It does say that we will recover the cost through increased fees, and that's probable, but how does this relate to what we've been doing?
Mayor and members of council, to address Council Member David's question, the City of San Carlos did a cost of services and cost allocation plan and fee study in the late 80s, and as far as I recall, that's the last time we've done a comprehensive study of this type. Since that time, we do periodic updates, typically once a year, where we make minor adjustments. The thought here was that we should, since it's been a long period of time, do both a update to the fee study as well as the cost of our services in each department, and to look at the overhead charges as well. In terms of the council member's question about cost, my guesstimate is we're probably looking at a study somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000 to $50,000 based on what this has cost us in the past.
And just for clarification, this is actually just the approval to issue a request for qualifications, not
That's correct.
even request for proposals or anything. It's just for qualifications, and then from those responses, then we can further drill down into what the actual cost may be.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, so it's probable then, Brian, that we would proceed with the 3 areas?
That's correct, Councilmember Davids. Generally speaking, when you do a comprehensive study of this type, you try to do them all together to look at all 3 areas. They sort of feed into each other, if you will.
Okay. All right.
Tom,
You want to move it?
do you want to move it?
I'll move it. Second.
Moved by Councilmember Davids, seconded by Vice Mayor Grocott. Christine?
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember King?
Yes.
Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes. Okay. The last item is, Matt, your item, a resolution. It has to do with a resolution authorizing an agreement between the City of San Carlos and Leslie Parks for professional services for the Palo Alto Medical Foundation's proposed medical center.
Thank you. I just wanted an understanding on this because the contract amount is not to exceed $20,000, and we updated our municipal code chapter 3 a while back to where this kind of action can be taken without approval of council as long as it's $50,000 or less. So I'm just wondering why we're even being asked to do this.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Grocott and Council. That was my decision because I thought that this project has such a high profile that we would give it a higher level of attention. You also have another plan on tonight with another consultant working on this project. There will be other contracts that may come along for a similar amount. Those I would process administratively if, in my judgment, they're lower key and not so policy sensitive.
One further question. As I understand it, we're doing this because, and for the public, what this is about is awarding a contract to Leslie Parks, who was our, give me the title, Mike.
Community Development Director.
Community Development Director. I want to make sure I get that right. And she has since retired, and the consideration here is to offer a contract to her for consulting services just on the Palo Alto Medical application, correct?
Not entirely correct. Mike, do you want to?
Actually, Mrs. Parks resigned from the city. She hasn't retired, and she's returned to her consulting practice that she had before she came to work with the city. I am recommending we not fill the position of Community Development Director at this point because we're pending a reorganization of the entire city structure to streamline, to take advantage of vacancies we anticipate occurring in the middle of this year, and to balance the budget by restructuring how we conduct business. It's possible that we could have our one employee remaining in the redevelopment agency handle most of the duties of the community development, the housing and redevelopment program. However, that individual can't do all of the work, and therefore the scenario I propose is that where there are hard skills that person has not yet developed in her career, that we would contract for the service. In this particular case, Mrs. Parks has been doing the costing and projecting and analysis on this application up to this point, and therefore she's a very logical person to continue to do that work because she's already up to speed and can build on her own work. So that'll be the most economical, pointing out that this will be funded by fees paid by the applicant, not by the taxpayers. There are at least two other issues that have these hard skills, and I believe I will be contracting with Mrs. Parks for those, but they're not of this profile, nor are they of this expense.
And it's a separate item. Tonight we're looking at just the Palo Alto Medical
That's correct.
Center. And the reason I ask that or bring it to a point is we've had situations where there's been criticism of some, people leaving and then coming back as consultants, and I think, to me at least, this is a little different.
Oh yes, I see.
Different situation because number one, it's dealing with an application that is ongoing with the city right now, and the client, if you will, Palo Alto Medical, is very aware of the whole agreement here and is on board. In fact, appreciates the idea of having someone that's continuing on their project.
Yes, I see. Thank you. I should have made that clear, I suppose, in the presentation. We're not contracting out the services of the Community Development Director. We're contracting out only pieces of it that have certain technical skills that the consultant has already developed. The ongoing duties of the Community Development Director will be conducted by someone else on staff.
And I do believe, help me out here, I saw in the staff report that Palo Alto Medical has been part of the discussion at least. They know what the action here is.
Yes, that is correct.
And they're on board.
They are they're supportive.
Okay. With
But
that,
for the record, this is only for the Palo Alto Medical Center.
Right.
Correct.
That is correct.
Okay.
Focus.
So, Matt, do you want to move approval?
I was just about to do that.
Oh, super.
Move approval of item 5J.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Christine?
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember King?
Yes.
Councilmember Davis? Yes. Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes. Okay. We're going to take item 6B out of order at the request of my fellow Vice Mayor here. 6B is the report from the consultant interviews for facilitation services for the City Council Strategic Planning, which was my pet project called Envision the Future originally, but
Still the same.
still the same. Jeff, do you want to do since you were staff on this?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just by way of a very brief introduction, February 1st, the subcommittee for this appointed by you, consisting of Vice Mayor Grocott and Councilmember King, interviewed 4 firms, and they have, in their report to you, indicated that they'd like to bring back 2 firms for the full council to take a look at, and they have a lot of additional information in their report. From a staff perspective, we're looking for information from you all tonight that would help us further define the scope of this project and the funding parameters that you would assign to it. And with that, I'll turn it over to the subcommittee.
Okay. Just to make it brief, the charge was look at, interview consultants who would take us through virtually a one-day or a brief $5,000 Envisions program. We did that, and I think I'll let Matt speak for himself, but we both came to the conclusion this project is a lot bigger than this one day. We really can't do what we think this body wanted done if we're guided by this dollar amount. And in 2 of the proposals, it went, Matt, I think you'd agree, went far beyond that, and it enticed us to say, well, you asked us to go look at I'll give it the $5,000 quickie. It can't be done, and I think our recommendation would be no. But we want the full council to be afforded the 2 of the proposals that covered much of the issues that we are now subsequently with the actions taken by Mr. Garvey. It kind of changed. We said, this is really appropriate now that we take a longer, more careful and informed look at it. Not changing your suggestion. And so that's where we're back to say we want you all to see what we saw, and we think one of those 2 could do the job. However, the kicker is it's going to cost more money. Secondly, we did comment, which is why Matt wanted this kind of out of order, is that we did look at trying to combine the 2, in terms of saving money, because when we charged us with this duty, it was just look at the Envisions. It was not. So it does. The staff report said we did not reach a consensus. I mean, the consensus was these are different skill sets. We don't recommend that they be commingled. At least I think, Matt, that's what we kind of said. So we said to our fellow council members, we've looked at this. We can't save money by having both of these under one contract. These are apples and oranges. But finally, that this report will really help, we think, in the selection process of a successor to Mr. Garvey, because it will outline what any future candidate might come in as to what the direction and vision of this body is.
Just quick clarification, by report, you mean the results of a strategic planning initiative?
Yes, because we think that when we hear the next phase of this item 6A, that process may take a little bit longer than this. We hope that this will be done first, and candidates or possible candidates, and even in our process of the selection of this individual, will have this document as a guide and a help in selecting, hopefully, the right person. Matt?
Matt, do you want to add?
Well, I had a couple of things. I agree with Mike. We did come pretty quickly to the conclusion that doing something of a one-day, even just a council on campus meeting, something like that, would not accomplish enough and cost too much relative to the benefit. And it became apparent to us with the 2 of the candidates that what they were talking about of something a little bit more drawn out, involving the community, involving the staff and the council, would make a lot more sense and more bang for the buck. That understood, could cost a lot more money. Yeah, a lot more money.
Bang, right.
And I just wanted to comment because I'd received some comments from the public. They were saying, they heard the vision word, and they thought, we've just done vision, so why are we doing it again? And this is entirely different, because what the previous project was dealt with the downtown and sort of a defined area of San Carlos, and it was architectural in nature. This is much broader, has to do with all kinds of projects and ideas that the city could look at. and where we're going as a whole, not just our downtown area. So just to clarify that. Thirdly, I had lunch today with a county supervisor, with Rich Gordon, and I asked him about this because they went through a similar process. In fact, one of the firms we looked at is the one that they used. And I asked him about, A, the usefulness of it. Did he think it was a useful process? And do they refer back to the document? He said it was useful. They do refer back to the document. And then as far as duration, he's asking that they look at it again, so not go through the full process, but to update it a little bit and keep it fresh. And I asked him about this idea of, chicken or egg. Should we do this and then look at a city manager? Should we look at a city manager and then do this, or do them together if we possibly could? And he actually thought, and this is just his comment, I'll throw it in, that having the city manager selected and then in position as we go through this process would actually be more beneficial, because the person would know what's going on, know the community that much better, and have a charge from it. And he said the skills that a city manager that you would hope them to have, no matter what you come up with, you would hope that they would have the skill sets to deal with whatever. So to him, he thought it would be more important to be involved. So I throw that out there.
Okay. Questions? Don?
No, my comments here would be to get the city manager on board first and get him involved in the process. Exactly what I wrote down when I read this stuff. So I guess Rich Gordon and I think alike on that. But I think that's very important, because I think for the role that the city manager plays, and historically, certainly in the last 17, 18 years that Mr. Garvey's been here, has been certainly that of a lead person from an administrative standpoint, and to have that person involved in the strategic planning of the city for the reasonably foreseeable future, which is what this is really all about, I think that's extremely important. So I'd say let's get on with life and get a city manager, then let's do this other process, presuming we can come up with the bucks with it, because it's still kind of a tidy little sum for that.
Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I think if there is some need to come together earlier, that perhaps we do it in somewhat of an informal setting, perhaps the council with a little facilitation, if that's something we should do. But this idea of getting into the specifics, when you read through the staff report, we're going to analyze economic development, quality of life, governmental services, fiscal environment. That's pretty deep stuff, and that's going to go really to the quick of the city. As far as what we're focused on during the next year or two is something that perhaps we can sit down and talk about if that's the wish of the council. So I would basically agree that before we spend this kind of money, $50,000 plus, to do this kind of study, that the new manager should be on board and work along with us.
Can I suggest, before we decide, our charge was before Mike had made any decisions, so we're out looking at. I'd still suggest to this body that we're talking about what Matt and I were faced with was, the 5 versus whatever this thing costs. So getting beyond the economics and actual fiscal impact that it has. But I'd still like for this body to see the whole group, and I turn it over to Matt, saying that there is some usefulness, saying it isn't worth doing this, and then we can always hold the timing to after that. But I think it would be helpful, Matt, I defer your views either, that all three of you hear what we heard and say, okay, of these two bodies, coincidentally, one of them happened to be the one I think that Rich and the Board of Soups used, which kind of sparked both of our interests in this. You hear it, and we might come to the conclusion saying, we don't want to do this at all, period.
So continue and close out the process you're involved in.
Yeah, I'd say we'll select somebody, and then if and when you select, and then maybe kind of cogitate on it and think, because it's going to take a long process. This isn't going to happen, and you might even give some thought to running in parallel. And I'd really like to hear the input because both of these people, both of these bodies have as one of their criteria, they've helped to select city managers.
Yeah. I would be very much in favor of running this in parallel up to a certain point. I mean, timing-wise, it may be that the city manager, we're close to identifying the final candidate for the city manager, and we start to look at, putting the process together for how we could do some strategic planning here in San Carlos. Or it may be the other way that, the city manager is identified after we've already sort of started this process. But I think that we as a council maybe should consider decoupling the two initiatives. Clearly, we have to replace the city manager, and I think none of us really have a clear understanding of how long or how much time that's going to take to find that right individual to lead San Carlos, or to provide the leadership as the CEO of San Carlos. On the flip side of the coin, I would also like to say, you know what, we certainly are have an opportunity right now to say, as a community, as a city, strategically, where should we be looking at as we start to figure out the budget over the next 2 to 3 to 5 years. And so I don't know that I'm necessarily tied to the need to couple them so closely together in terms of timing. I think timing-wise, they'll probably be running along about the same. They may run along the same process by the time you get consensus and you start to figure out what the process is, assuming that we even as a council want to move forward. I do like the recommendation of the subcommittee in saying, hear what these people have to say, because clearly, I asked Matt and Mike to sit on this subcommittee somewhat purposely, because I think, Mike's always saying, where's the money? What's the money look like? And Matt, I know you were supportive of this early on from when you and I were up at the League of California Cities, and we both came back and went, you know what, other councils are doing this. They're getting together once a year for sort of a retreat or a workshop to just kind of talk about issues and some planning and things like that as a council. So I would like to suggest, since it sort of started out as my initiative, I'd like it to be, that we move forward as give direction for staff to help look for the money, if that's what it's going to be, and then also to arrange some time for the consultants to come in and talk to us as a council, and then to make that decision from that point.
I would agree with the next step of hearing the committee's completed report. I have a real problem proceeding with the contract, though, prior to a city manager coming on. And I think when you talk about workshops and councils getting together for workshops, they're not talking about a $50,000 to $65,000 item.
Yeah, no, I understand.
There's got to be a way to do the workshop in a much less aggressive and less intensive way. And I think there's some value in that. But this particular approach at the 50,000 plus, I think really needs to wait until the manager gets here. But I do think that we ought to bring the subcommittee to a completion and hear out the recommendations.
That is our, well, Matt,
Yeah.
that is our
that is our
recommendation.
recommendation.
And we talked about negotiating it down and confining it. But what we wanted to do was, the charge we had was the $5,000 quickie, get it done, we recommend can't be done. And we're not recommending all the way to the 50. We're just saying bring these two in, you assess it, and at that time we can try to negotiate. And then I would urge this body, then at that time you decide whether, listen to both of them, because when you read their, Matt and I have both heard them, they both have done city manager assessment groups, so they'll be helpful as well. Then you make that decision.
My only comment was that I think that, Inga, when you're talking about concurrency here, I would anticipate that, presuming we go ahead and approve item 6A tonight, which is going ahead with getting a consultant to hire a new city manager, that process could take anywhere from, on the short side, probably 90 days to maybe 120, maybe 150 days, but we're not going to be without a city manager that long after Mr. Garvey leaves mid-May. And I think that by the time we go put this whole idea of looking at goals and getting together through the mill and figuring out where the money's coming from, we may be right in step to where we really get moving right about the time a new city manager gets on board. It's the way I think it's probably going to work anyway.
Okay. So do we need a motion on this to, I guess so, authorization to, oh, I'm sorry. So I guess we don't really need a motion to bring this,
Just a consensus.
to bring it back to consensus to council.
We would ask that we will set up a meeting for these two to be interviewed, kind of like what we did this morning.
Perhaps before, maybe
council.
before council meeting. We can just come in a little bit early.
And then staff can then come back with a report on finding the money
Okay.
and the timing.
Now, just a clarification, if we do hold a meeting like that, it would be a public meeting. It's open to the public. Just to clarify.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you for both of you for your efforts on the subcommittee. Appreciate that. Next item, 6A, is the authorization. Wait, let me get back to my agenda here. One tonight. Sorry. Report from our Human Services Director, Andrea Greenberg. Human Resources Director regarding recruitment of a new city manager. And
Thank you,
we'll
Madam
take 6AI as well, which is the authorization to proceed with the selection of executive recruitment firm in the same agenda item.
Okay, fine, thank you. I'm here tonight to ask the council to direct staff to select an executive recruiter so that we could proceed with the city manager recruitment. I'm also here to ask that the city council authorize the city manager or his designee sign the contract for such services. The selection of an executive recruiting firm will provide the council with professional assistance that we believe will work in our favor because these folks are well-versed, have a lot of depth in city manager recruitment, have excellent contacts, networks in that field. They already have the setups ready to do polished ads. They have reservations in the publications needed, so they can get this going for you very quickly. In addition to that, they have the personal touch. They know these folks in the field, and right now I can tell you, just from talking to my fellow human resource directors, that there are a lot of city managers who are leaving the city manager field, either to go on to other positions or to retire. So we're finding ourselves in a situation where we're going to be competing with other cities, and I think we need to do everything that we can to have the best advantage that we can in this recruitment. It will probably take, my guesstimate, you said 90 days. I think that might be a little on the conservative side. I think we're probably talking 4.5 months potentially. And then depending upon the background. So it could be 4.5 to 5 months out in terms of hiring a city manager if we start right away. I've put an RFP out to 4 of the top recruiters in our state, and I've set a deadline date with your direction of February 25th, which means that I should have made a selection hopefully by March 4th, and then we can get rolling on that recruitment immediately. The cost would be between about $25,000 and $30,000. Some of that will be in reimbursable expenses, but probably about $20,000 to $25,000 in the recruitment activities.
Any discussion?
I think that's the way it's done. I think we need to get on with doing it, and I'd be willing to move what is being requested here.
Okay.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Christine?
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember King?
Yes.
Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes.
Thank you. I'll proceed.
Thank you very much. Next item on tonight's agenda is public hearing. It's a public hearing for the consideration of abandoning a variable strip of public right-of-way along the southerly side of Oakley Avenue and the northerly side of Lytton Avenue, adjacent to assessors parcels numbers 04992-270, 04992-340, and 04992-350. And just for the purpose, for the audience's knowledge, this is actually more of an administrative type of item that we have to go through. We wish we could shortcut this to an administrative level, but we can't.
Mayor and members of council, I'll be doing the presentation tonight for Mr. Mukhtari, who could not be here. This is a relatively straightforward abandonment because it involves one property owner. The property owner has requested the abandonment of property along both Linton and Oakley Avenue. His property fronts on both streets. You'll notice in the handout that I just gave you that in the portion that fronts on Oakley, the portion of his front yard is actually in the right-of-way. And so that is the main motivation for him making this request. I talked earlier today with Don Gilbert from the Public Works staff, and he indicated that there are some utilities along Oakley, and with that in mind, if we do the abandonment, if you do approve it, we would retain public utility easements as a part of that action.
The questions for Mr. Mora? Okay. Do I have a motion to close the I'm sorry, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone here from the public that wishes to speak on this item?
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
It's It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Opposed? Is there any discussion?
I move to introduce Resolution 2005-111.
111.
Is there a second?
Second.
Don, did you second? Oh, okay. Sorry, Don already got it. Christine, do you mind?
Councilmember King?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember David?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes. Next item, 7B, is a consideration, again, a public hearing, consideration of a mitigated negative declaration and ordinance amendment for 800 Britton Avenue, which is the Black Mountain Properties. I'm sorry, Black Mountain Properties is the applicant. And as well, we'll cover 7B, subset 1, amendment of the development agreement for 800 Britton Avenue as the same agenda item. Staff?
I'm having technical difficulties.
So while you guys are talking about that, let me just, for the public, this is actually a request for a mitigated negative declaration, a zoning ordinance amendment, a conditional use permit, grading and dirt haul permit, an architectural review for a proposed two-story, approximately 30,000 square foot office and light industrial building on approximately 59,000 square feet of a vacant site at 800 Britton. It's the corner of Britton Avenue and the 101.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First, I'd like to clarify that before the council is only the mitigated negative declaration and the zoning ordinance amendment. The Planning Commission heard all 5 items, and within my presentation, I'll give you the results of their meeting. It's also included in your staff report. The 800 Britton Avenue site is a vacant, approximately 59,000 square foot lot. Its existing zoning is a planned community for a 3-story office building of 36,000 square feet. And the surrounding land uses are Polgas Creek to the north, U.S. Highway 101 to the east, and generally office, regional retail, and light industrial uses to the south and to the west. And on your exhibit, as well as in your staff report, there's some maps and some photos that go along with that. The proposal is for construction of a new building of 30,000 square feet. It's a reduction in the existing approved plan of 6,000 square feet, and a 2-story building, which is a reduction in the height of the building from a 3-story to a 2-story, with 100 on and off-site parking spaces, and that's also a reduction in the required parking, although the project is still meeting the city's parking requirements. The uses would be office and light industrial uses, and the required approvals, as the mayor mentioned, are the mitigated negative declaration, planned community, and the Planning Commission has unanimously recommended or has approved the conditional use permit, the grading and dirt haul permit, and architectural review contingent on the council's approval of a negative declaration and the zoning as requested. The Planning Commission's actions were unanimous, and I was at the Planning Commission hearing. They were very clear about their direction, and that was that they were requesting the City Council to adopt the mitigated negative declaration and zoning ordinance as proposed for the project. They did add some conditions. First, to clarify that the council approvals are a prerequisite to the execution of the grading and dirt haul permit, the architectural review, and the conditional use permit. In addition, they added conditions to prohibit disruption of utility services and to preclude access for construction and for grading activities directly onto and from the site onto Britton Avenue because of the speed of the traffic there, as well as the on-ramp and off-ramp to U.S. Highway 101 that coincides with a portion of Britton Avenue right there. In addition, the Commission did make some very clear statements with respect to the 25-foot setback for the creeks. Each one of the commissions spoke individually, and they collectively agreed that in this particular case an exception was warranted. But as a previous speaker did mention in your public comments, the Commission is concerned about the 25-foot setback as a policy issue and requested that the Planning Director work with the City Council and with the City Manager to set up some kind of a discussion on that topic from a broader standpoint. But for this project, the Commission felt that the exception was warranted. The mitigated negative declaration before you has a number of mitigation and avoidance measures. The mitigation and avoidance measures for the aesthetic issues include lighting shields and non-reflective building materials. For air quality, those measures include a comprehensive dust control program during construction. The biological resources mitigations and avoidance measures include creek protection from construction activities, as well as habitat enhancement with planting of native vegetation along the creek. The geology and soils measures include implementation of all applicable codes and recommendations of the city geologist. For hazards and hazardous materials, the applicants will preclude hazardous materials from use and storage on the site for the life of the project. For hydrology and water quality, measures include erosion control, all NPDES and Regional Water Quality Control Board requirements, as well as the elevation of the site above the 100-year flood level and the building, of course, above the 100-year flood level as well. For noise, the measures include all city and state standards and restricted construction hours. And for transportation and traffic mitigation, it includes traffic and safety measures during construction, as well as TDM strategies that have been agreed to by the applicant to reduce project trips. Each one of these mitigation and avoidance measures has been agreed to by the applicant and is included in the project. The zoning ordinance amendment is basically meeting the city goal of providing flexible office and industrial space, and it's also meeting the city goal of providing local jobs. The project includes, as I mentioned, all the mitigation and avoidance measures and has available municipal services. There are site-specific factors which support the reduced creek setback, and that is what staff is recommending. In addition, in order to answer your questions, and if you wish more information regarding the creek, the city's consulting biologist is present this evening. Mr. Rick Hopkins from LOA Associates is here to also answer your questions on that issue, should you have any later. But basically, the conclusion of both the biology report prepared by the applicant's biologist as well as the report prepared by the city's consulting biologist is that the riparian habitat at this location is marginal, that it is not part of an existing or does not have the potential to connect with an open space corridor, that the access to the site via the bridge that's already constructed over Pulgas Creek requires filling and putting the building above the flood level, also requires fill being added to the site, and that there is little benefit to increasing the setback. I've passed out, based on some questions that were forwarded to the planning director, a site plan that shows what the results would be if you increase the setback to 25 feet. Basically, the result is that you would increase the landscaped area for the site by only 1,725 feet total. And you can see it's painted green on that little exhibit that I provided for you. The project also includes habitat enhancement and maintenance so that the vegetation does take hold and the applicant is required to maintain that until such time as it takes hold, and then it is let go into a natural state as consistent with the recommendations of the city's consulting biologist. In addition, this project contains development standards that we're asking the council or we're recommending that the council approve in the context of the zoning that are slightly different than those included in the plan set. And the purpose for this is when you actually go to construct a building, there are what we call engineering tolerances. They're somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 or 2%. They're very minor. So all of the requirements are so that the applicant can in fact construct the building, should the council approve it, as it's shown to you, without having to actually come back to you for some minor difference. But it does require that all of the major issues be met, such as the height cannot be exceeded, but if a piece of equipment is a little bit taller, a foot taller, and the screen has to be raised so that you don't see it from the street, that's what this little bit of flexibility in development standards provides. It enables the actual construction of the building as you see it before you. In response to the public comments, the creek setback, the public comments were basically that the 25 feet violates the municipal code, and in fact, if the council should approve a planned community for this property, in the context of that, a reduced setback can be approved by the council if you so choose. The open space corridor was a question both at the commission as well as in written comments, and essentially there is no opportunity available to integrate this 200-foot length with any planned or existing open space corridor. Flooding was an issue raised by the public, and elevating the site and directing the runoff into an existing storm drain will reduce the site's current contribution to Polgus Creek in terms of water runoff. So it does minorly reduce the amount of flooding impact from Polgus Creek, in the sense that the runoff from the site as it exists, as opposed to how it would exist if this building were built, is reduced. And the last question that was raised was whether or not there is an inventory of biological resources, and in fact both biology reports contain such an inventory and conclude that the proposed development will have no impact on any wetlands. For these reasons, as well as those that are more extensively articulated in the staff report, staff recommends that the City Council adopt the resolution approving the mitigated negative declaration and mitigation monitoring plan, subject to the conditions in the planned community ordinance, based on the required findings and for the reasons outlined in the staff report. And secondly, staff recommends that the City Council approve the planned community ordinance based on the required findings and for the reasons outlined in the staff report. I'm available to answer any questions, as is the city's consulting biologist.
Questions for staff? I actually just had one question.
I have some questions.
Oh, Matt, do you want to go first?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right. Thank you. The questions I have, the first one relates to the 30 feet setback that's on the table.
Yes.
And I just wanted to get a clarification. That 30 feet relates to the building
That's
itself,
correct.
right? So the building footprint
That's
is
correct.
30 feet. Okay. The second question I had refers to, see if I can find a page number for you. Page 6 of 11, towards the bottom, item 3, it talks about the need for the grading that has to be done. And I'm curious about that because the bridge was built for a previous project that came before the City Council years ago. And I remember at that time, I wasn't even on the council, I was down there, and I came up and I spoke about 25-foot setback because of the same, we had a similar proposal at that time asking for a parking lot to go like 5 or 10 feet from the creek, top of bank. And I asked the council to consider holding to the current ordinance, which is, as you've stated, 25 feet. And that was done. But the only thing that was broke that rule, if you will, was this bridge. And the argument of the Public Works Director at the time was, in order to touch down, we've got to touch down within this 25-foot setback. And so that, like I say, that was done. So my question is, I'm just trying to follow the logic here. It doesn't seem to make sense to me that a bridge was built for a project where there was a 25-foot setback that was held to, and now this report's telling us it can't be done. So
Madam Mayor, members of the council, from an engineering perspective, it's been my experience that most anything can be done given enough money and the will to do it. Having said that, there comes the consideration of trade-offs. The previous project, and I have done some extensive research while I was not present, and some of you were. I have done some extensive research on the information that was provided from that council decision. And basically, the council did make the decision to adhere to the 25-foot setback with the exception of the bridge and its attendant structures. However, that project was not engineered. It was a decision that was made, and then the applicant was left to engineer it subsequent to the council's decision. When actually looking at a piece of ground and in looking at trying to physically construct something with the retaining walls, and you can see from the picture how high the bridge needed to be elevated in order to meet the flooding requirements, you end up with 5-foot retaining walls that travel some distance into the site. You have handicapped access requirements, and what you have with this site, quite candidly, is what I would term colloquially a push and pull of issues. And it is my considered recommendation that the least the most environmentally sensitive, frankly, is to reduce that setback and subsequently reduce the amount of retaining wall, provide for the fill, because you're going to have to go into the 25-foot setback, whether it's 5 feet or 25 feet, in order to construct the retaining wall, because you construct a retaining wall from the downside up, not from the upside down, in terms of the height of the site. And you're going to have to connect it. You're going to have to provide handicapped access at a 6% grade, which, if you look at the site plan, you can see how the sidewalk actually meanders a little bit or has to curve around in order to meet that 6%. Your vehicle percentage, I believe, is 10 or 8. Somebody's going to have to help me on that. One of the two. It's a little bit less restrictive than your pedestrian access to meet the ADA requirements. So you have a push and pull with these things, and the previous project, as I said, was not actually engineered. It was a decision that was made on a policy level, but the applicant did not go back, nor did the engineer actually go and physically draw it and determine whether or not it could be constructed.
Thanks. My second question is, looking at the wording of the resolution, the second part, which says, whereas the proposed project is in accordance with the environmental plans, goals, and policies of the City of San Carlos. In order to approve this, we have to find that that's true, and I'm struggling with that because, as far as I'm concerned, the goals, policies of our environmental plans and goals of the City of San Carlos, we have an ordinance, 25-foot setback, and that is to set up certain goals. And number two, when we did the East Side specific plan, we looked at this, I remember Tom brought this up, of this riparian corridor being a green belt. And although I see in the staff report that it says it's a marginal area, I guess my question is, if it's a marginal area, I can see that it is. The whole creek's a marginal as far as being a habitat right now. But if we don't start paying attention to that policy now, when do we?
Can you hold your comments?
No, I'm asking a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was missing the question.
Okay, the question is, if we don't start holding to our policies to meet our goals, our plans and goals, our environmental plans and goals.
And so this is the question for staff.
Well, she wrote the staff report. So, and she's saying in here that it's a minimal area and it's a minimal habitat, which I'm admitting, but I'm saying if we're not going to change it from being minimal to being maximum now, which is this is an opportunity. This is a development. Again, I was talking to Rich Gordon today about this project because of what they've done in the county, and he told me about a subdivision. And they just made a decision as a board. We've got these policies. Here's the chance to implement it. We've got this subdivision. They want to go, of course, same thing, within 10 feet of the creek, and they said no. And theirs is actually 50 feet.
Matt, your comments are absolutely valid, but this is a public hearing.
I understand that. So I've asked a question. If not now, when?
I can't answer for the council when.
Yeah.
However, I can say that the council can make the finding that this is consistent with your goals and policies, even if the setback is reduced from 25 feet to what is being proposed by the applicant, if the council determines that this is a case that warrants that kind of reduction through the planned community. So it does not violate your ordinances or your policies. And in fact, you could very successfully make the finding that because it includes habitat enhancements that are not now present along that creek, that in fact it does further your goals for creek protection and for your setback and riparian goals for the city as a whole.
There are other questions for staff? Tom?
Carol, the plan you gave us shows a green area, and that green area currently is part of the roadway that circles the building.
That's correct.
And so the roadway basically goes in to the south, comes around, goes either direction really, but it goes around the building and exits over the bridge that's now existing. What happens, and you mentioned there's very little fill, I think I heard you say that, but how do you get to the bridge level, which is now quite high? It's about 5 feet above grade, I think. Fortunately, you dumped some stuff there so we could climb around a little bit and get down to the site, but it's a pretty good drop. So how do you deal with coming off of that bridge, and how do you get back onto that bridge considering its height?
If the project is approved by the council and subsequently constructed, the fill is actually brought, and I'm told this is physically possible. I've never seen it. They actually bring the fill across the bridge, and the bridge will hold the weight of the trucks with the fill, as well as fire trucks and everything else, and drop the fill over onto the site and build the dirt ramp, if you will, from that 5-foot height of the bridge down onto the site, and then from that point they then access the site and then begin to raise it, and the site is raised approximately 3 feet along that northern edge, and then it will slope down to Britton Avenue and meet the existing grade at Britton Avenue.
Okay, and how about the retaining wall? Does that then go along the roadway?
Yes, the retaining wall goes along the north side of all of the pavement there. Its highest point, of course, is where it meets the bridge, which is approximately 5 feet, and then it goes down to approximately 3 feet all along that northern border of the site along Polgus Creek, and then the retaining walls wrap around the site and follow the paved area down to Britton Avenue, where it is reduced to nothing.
And can you describe the type of revegetation that they plan for that area?
I would have to defer to the biologist, or else you'll have to let me go back over there and get the report. There's an actual list of plants that
should we let her
they
defer?
have prepared.
I don't need the list, but I was just looking at it today, and a fair amount of that sidewall from the creek is sloughing down. And that would seem to be a condition that happens during flood times, and we could probably expect it to happen. Will there be any curing of that in the process? Will the sidewall of the creek be stabilized so that this is held in place, or do you know?
I can speculate that normally that's done with riprap, but what the Planning Commission and what you're in the context of the Planning Commission's approval, they requested that a hydrologist provide information prior to construction, and that the recommendations of the hydrologist be followed. That may include riprap on the side of the creek, and the biologist will also be consulted, because we can put planting along the creek that is both native as well as that can help deter erosion, so that the effects that you're seeing and that you're describing can be minimized.
Okay. And just one final comment. I appreciate your notation on the bike lockers. Just for the benefit of the developer, we can buy, or he can buy, bike lockers that are stackable, so in case they need more than 6 lockers, they can stack another level on the 6. They got 12 total, they got 24 spaces, so.
And there is space to put more bike lockers. If the council should decide that you want more bike lockers, we can certainly require that they be added.
All right, fine, thank you.
Mike, did you have a question?
I just have one quick question. On the application, we're dealing only with the mitigated deck, and we've called this a zoning ordinance. You've referred to it in the staff report as the planned community ordinance change. Is it not? The findings are for a zoning ordinance change.
Planned community is a zoning ordinance change.
But for the record, it is a zoning ordinance change that we're making the changes to. Yeah.
To the zoning of planned community.
Right, and we're not dealing with the use permit, we're not dealing with the grading or the arc review, right? So
Correct.
When we,
What does that mean, Mike, for the setback from the creek, though?
it's really no difference. It depends what the original planned unit development, that's all I was looking at, was that there was a planned community ordinance in place. And what was originally approved is really, but we're talking about a zoning ordinance here.
But the original approval was 25 feet.
Correct.
Now we're down to 5 or
Correct.
10 or whatever it is.
Correct. And the other point was that, we could talk about these other, it just, when we clean up the final draft, that we keep the other conditional use permits, grading, dwelling out of it. We're just really talking negative deck here and zoning / planned community ordinance changes.
Okay, I had two, I hope, fairly quick questions. You mentioned in one of their mitigations the hazard and hazardous materials.
Yes.
And yet you've indicated a use of light industrial. So my question, I guess maybe you can answer this if not the applicant, is because generally light manufacturing does have some levels of what would be considered hazardous materials. They may be non-reportable quantities, but they still have them, whether they're for lab use or for solvents for cleaning up things and stuff like that. How does that reconcile with light industrial? Do you limit the uses that are permitted within the light industrial or within their conditional use?
The way that this project is structured currently is the applicant is limiting the use in the context of their lease agreements for the project. And
So maybe I'll ask the question of the applicant.
But the applicant could describe that more fully for you.
Okay, and then my second question actually has to do with, it's actually a follow-up to Tom's question, because typically if you're going to do anything within a creek or a creek setback area, it requires Department of Fish and Game approvals for things like building up the creek beds and things like that, and generally those are hard to come by, if not almost impossible to get those permits to do that. Has the Department of Fish and Game been notified about this project, or this proposed project?
This proposed project is not subject to either U.S. Fish and Wildlife or to the Department of Fish and Game because it does not propose to go beyond the top of bank in terms of its improvements. The bridge is already constructed. That already did receive those approvals. And this project is in fact not subject to their review. If they, for some reason, if something happens that they do go beyond the top of bank, either from a construction standpoint or if, as one of the council members mentioned, there needs to be some repair work done, that would then be a subsequent approval from Fish and Game. But at this time, there is no proposal to go beyond the top of bank.
Okay, so Tom, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, one further. Don, do you have a question for Steph?
Yeah, I've got a couple quick ones. On this lovely little map you passed out, is the retaining wall the darkened line that is on the right side, if you're looking at it this way, of the green area? Where is the retaining wall?
The retaining wall is under the darkened line. The darkened line is to draw your attention to where the 25-foot setback would be. But the retaining wall, I thought you all got large-size plan sets. I'm not sure. If you do, you can read them a lot easier, and you can actually see on the site plan where the retaining wall is.
Okay, and if the retaining wall is under the darkened line, which is not up on the board for everybody to see, but it seems to me that as I went on the adjacent property this morning, and the adjacent building at the bottom of the page, so to speak, just stepping it off from the top of the creek bank is approximately 15 feet. It looks like this building is 25 feet from the top of the creek bank at least.
It's 30 feet.
30 feet, okay. Good guess on the at least part. And that what goes in between that is actually a restored environmental area, essentially that's all appropriately landscaped, is that correct, generally speaking?
Yes.
Other than the retaining wall?
Wait, I think Don's misreading. I think Don thinks that this green thing that you handed out is new landscaping.
Is it?
It's actually the road under the
No,
proposed
the green
application.
landscaping shows what would be additional landscaping if the council approves a 25-foot setback. It doesn't show that you'd have to completely lop off the building and do a whole lot of other things. Right now, the landscaped area that's proposed is between the dotted line and the green area. In other words, it has no color to it where we're proposing landscaping. The green only shows the 1,725 additional square feet that would result if the council determines that it's appropriate to maintain the 25-foot setback.
And the trade-off is running the road the rest of the way around that side of the building?
No, there is no trade-off from running the road around the rest of the building. That's a fire department requirement, as well as you can't maneuver on the site because it's so tight. It would, if the council should decide to go with a 25-foot setback, it would result in a loss of, I'm going to give it a ballpark guess, about 4,000 square feet of rentable space on the building, because you have to also lop off the building, rearrange the parking, and do all of those things. That project has not been engineered, but I'm just showing you here what you would gain from an environmental standpoint by increasing the setback to 25 feet, and it's only 1,725 square feet total of additional landscaping, other than what's being proposed.
Don, did you have another question?
Nope, not now.
I have one of Tom.
Okay. Mike has a question of Tom.
On this. Is the 60, is that why you're looking for more lockers? Because I'm looking at the TDM, the conditions. Is there a ratio for bike lockers per?
I don't believe there was initially either. My question for Liz this afternoon was how many lockers do they plan to place? And I see
if there is, it has to be in the TDM, and I was just looking at it.
Yeah. I think 6 is a good start. That gives you 12 bikes. You can stack them. That gives you 24 bikes. And if we need more, I think the applicant would.
Okay. With that, this is a public hearing, so members of the public, actually, what I'd like to do is give the applicant an opportunity to speak first, followed by members of the public. I do have speaker slips from 4 individuals, and I would like to note also for the record that Ms. Patterson, we received your packet, and we've all read it as it relates to this project. So if you have further comments, please feel free to make those at that time. Is the applicant here? Would you like to say anything about your project?
Good evening, Madam Mayor. My name is Ted Hanig. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, which is Black Mountain Properties, also known as Three Sisters. I did actually have a PowerPoint presentation, but in the interest of time, I think I'll just briefly go through our points because your staff presentation was extremely thorough. The team that is present here tonight for Resource to the Council includes Michael Basilios from Karen Wright, civil engineer, Paul Reed, our landscape architect, Scott Brassfield from Vitae, our architect, Bill Butler, the general contractor, Joe Bullock and Tony Bullock, 3rd and 4th generation family members from the Falstich family and Black Mountain Springwater, and Marty Rubery, who's the CEO of Three Sisters, now doing business as Black Mountain Properties. First, for the record, the applicant accepts staff recommendations as they are obligations on the owner or on the applicant, but we do believe that they are in the best interest of the property. As you know, your staff on this has been independent to the city, and I think they provided an objective and very fair and thorough analysis. And I commented that at the Planning Commission because I do have the opportunity to see a variety of staff reports. The Planning Commission, as you know, had a very thorough hearing. There are people genuinely concerned about issues such as the creek setback in the city, and after their deliberations and after hearing the public input, their decision was unanimous to support the project as presented. As you know, this project is an enhancement to property that is now owned by the city. I think it serves as a good example of synergy that can exist between the private sector and the city. Previously, the land was really undevelopable. If you were familiar with its configuration before, Three Sisters deeded over a section of that land along the creek bank, as well as provided a permanent easement across their property that provided ingress and egress as well as parking. So with the cooperation of the applicant, we've taken what was a surplus, undevelopable piece of property, and I believe have made it into an extremely valuable asset for the community. And I think, as you've heard tonight, actually, I think in the long run, the creek bank will be better off having this development, having stewards there that will take care of that over time. In terms of progress on the site, as you know, the bridge has been built. We have gone to a new design because of the radical change in the reality of the world from when everyone thought a three-story office building could work there with a smaller building footprint when the 25-foot foot setback was possible. However, we've had to expand the footprint to make a viable project there for us and for the city over the long term, and therefore that is why it has come back to you on that issue. The project itself is smaller. It's smaller by about 20%, and it's gone from 3 stories to 2 stories. This is to adapt to the current world that we live in and the foreseeable future, and Three Sisters Black Mountain has done all of this on its initiative to try and have a project that works not only for Three Sisters but for the community and the long-term ownership, because this property will go back to the city. However, we also wish to offer to the city to operate as a land bank for the city. So if ever there's a property or facility that you wish to acquire in the future, Black Mountain Three Sisters stands ready to acquire that for the city and swap out. So you have with this project a wonderful long-term asset as well as a land bank that will appreciate with other real estate in the community, and I think that's a wise move for any community. Specifically in terms of the creek area, I'd like to emphasize staff's comment that we are increasing the ability to drain water flow from there by the shifting of the water runoff from this site to Britain. We also are making significant improvements, if you've been out there and looked, on what vegetation will exist and what the long-term future for that area will be. The applicant has a vested interest. As some of you may know, the Falstich family, which is the family that started Black Mountain, has been in San Carlos since 1932. We now have one of the Three Sisters, the remaining one that's alive, residing on the Alameda in San Carlos, and the family plans to have 3 generations living in this city. They also, as you may know, took from nothing a company here in San Carlos and built it to a company that the world's largest food company took interest in, which I think is quite an achievement for one of your citizens. And the Black Mountain Springwater Company was purchased, but the family has kept their focus here in San Carlos, and they are building an investment company which will be based here in San Carlos. When you have multiple generations that have proven over the years to be extremely successful in what they do, I think you'll find them to be very good stewards of an asset of the city. And the creek is also an asset which I think they will take very good care of. And I think that, combined with the mitigation and the staff recommendations, will be a great enhancement to that area. If you've been out there and seen how it looks currently, I think you can understand why I'm optimistic about how it will look. And as the biologists have said from all corners, there is no significant biological resource that will be adversely affected by this project. And the proposed building itself is not within the 25-foot setback. So as you can see, the value to the city, I think, is dramatic. We've added great value to the land. We've provided a permanent easement to this property. We've created a bridge so that things can be built there. It's both a literal and figurative bridge to the future that has been placed there. We are enhancing drainage. We're creating bioswale filtration. And we're protecting and enhancing the top of the bank, and with some native vegetation, I might add. And as I mentioned, we have the long-term value of the land bank. So with an applicant that has, I think, the history that this family has with the city of San Carlos, you know this project is going to be in good hands. And I think for multiple generations, Black Mountain will be here to be a continuing partner with you on this project. Thank you.
Other questions for the applicant? Perhaps you could answer my question about the hazardous materials and the light industrial.
Sure, I'd be happy to, and also I could comment a little bit on the bike locker if that interest is still there. With hazardous materials, as you may know, the Three Sisters Black Mountain operates the San Carlos Business Park, which is adjoining, as well as many other properties. And we have, and I can say as author of the lease, provisions in the lease that restrict light industrial users from bringing on hazardous materials, with the exception of the routine that are used in office products and that sort of thing. To date, we have not had any type of zoning issue over that. We have not had a tenant who has created any type of environmental problem. We simply have not run into the issues that seem to be of concern there. So I think our lease, with a very strong anti-hazardous material clause, pardon me, as well as providing for the routine, gets us through the issue that perhaps you were concerned about. In terms of the bike lockers, I think if there's demand, Black Mountain Three Sisters has always emphasized trying to keep their tenants happy. And if there's demand for bike lockers, I think they'd be delighted to provide whatever that request is. We also talked about whether tenants would want to bring their bikes indoors because of theft and other issues. So I think it would be handled on a tenant basis with what the need is and whether they're bringing them inside for protection.
I have a question, Ted. Well, I'm looking at the floor plan on the first floor, and I'm seeing a total of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 spaces. Those are the presumably defined areas for renting, for leasing?
Correct. It can be flexible, and in fact, that's one of the aspects of this building is what they call flex plan.
This will not allow vehicle access to or into the areas. It's not that kind of occupancy you're dealing with, I presume.
No, although they do have roll-up doors so that they could bring material in through a roll-up door for a light industrial application if they chose to.
Okay, except on one side there's parking, so
yes,
that's a bit of a limit. On the other side, I presume you could drive to and perhaps even into if that was appropriate.
If it was appropriate. The concept, I think, that was used is to try and make this building as flexible as possible. We'll be stewards for 40 years, but this building has a life expectancy that will far exceed that, and so that it will remain able for the city to move to as the economy shifts to different applications.
Thank you.
You know, your elevation doesn't show any of those roll-up doors, and that's, I'm assuming, the elevation where the roll-up doors would be. Is that correct?
I think we're successful if you don't see the roll-up doors, because that is the whole concept, that these doors are invisible as roll-up doors. They appear to the naked eye walking by to be just like an ordinary building, and it's one of the advancements in architecture. But I'm an attorney, not an architect, so I guess I should check and verify that that's what's being shown. So they've succeeded.
They look like windows to me. Okay.
And that's the goal, actually.
Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. Are there other questions for the applicant? Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I have now speaker slips from 6 individuals. We respectfully request that you try to limit your comments to about 2 minutes, and then you're more than welcome to come back at the end. First up, Andy Frisch, followed by Kara Vonk and Barbara Patterson.
Council, I often feel that mainly...
I'm sorry, name and
Andy
city
Frisch,
of residence
San
for
Carlos.
the record, please.
Andy Frisch, and I reside in San Carlos. And I often feel like you often get in front of you mainly the NIMBYs, the people who don't want to see development in our community or against projects. And I just wanted to come out and tell you, I actually thought our Planning Commission got this dead on. I'm very proud of the commitment that our city does have to creeks and waterways, but I think there are hard choices to be made, and I think ultimately this benefits us greatly in terms of the improvement to the site, improvement for the city, and ultimately improvement for the whole creek system because of the stewardship of the odors and ultimately the stewardship of the city that will be at the site. I think it has good vision for what we're talking about, for what we'd like to see in the city, and it just seems like an excellent project for San Carlos. So I just wanted to commend our Planning Commission. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Cara?
Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, my name is Cara Vonk, and I reside at 423 Hillcrest Road, San Carlos. I'm addressing you with concerns about the impact of the project on the Pulgas Creek, and in particular, lack of the 25-foot setback and a retaining wall with blacktop 5 feet from the top of the creek bank. As has been mentioned, in 2001, the City Council reviewed this project when it was proposed to be a 3-story building with a much smaller footprint. I believe Tom Davids and Michael King were on the council at that time. I know Sally Mitchell was. Great pains were taken at that time to preserve the 25-foot setback and to work out circulation on the site, including handicapped access. There was discussion about landscaping and providing a pleasant outdoor seating area for employees to have lunch and enjoy the creek. These were all ideas to support enhance city policies to preserve and enhance our riparian habitat and creekside open space corridor. This is also good business strategy and will attract clientele, making the project desirable with a higher possible rate of return. In the 90s, the Planning Commission denied Kelly Moore's application to build another building immediately adjacent to Pulgas Creek, and Pep Boys was told to maintain the 25-foot setback and plant native species. Around that time, I took photos of the entire length of Pulgas Creek, including this site, which was a beautiful grassy area with trees populated with abundant wildlife, especially ducks. More recently, the site has been scraped bare. The current proposal will turn the creek into yet another unwanted dumping ground. I don't know what this is about habitat enhancements. There is no space, and as was mentioned, a hydrologist might recommend riprap. What else can it do? There is no place for the creek to meander after this project is built. It will be impossible to reverse this travesty. I don't think the council can make findings that the proposed planned community development zoning is consistent with the city's general plan and city council's policies, or that the site area and dimensions produce a stable and desirable character. The city's policies, as expressed in the open space element and circulation element, call for an open space corridor along our creeks and to support riparian habitat. And apparently there's also some mention in the East Side specific plan. It is in this apparent joint venture with the City of San Carlos, the city has an opportunity to send a strong message to other developers, setting a model example of how a project should be built, incorporating and celebrating our most precious natural resources. It was possible under the plans of 2001, and it is possible now. Please, I ask you to reject this proposal and ask that it be redesigned. Thank you.
Thank you, Cara. Barbara Peterson, followed by Addison Olean, and then Steve Mitchell. And if there's others that wish to speak, please fill out a speaker slip, please.
Yes, I'm Barbara Patterson, 801 Walnut Street. And I appreciate your comment about the referring this to the Department of Fish and Game, because in fact this is city-owned property, and the area is in fact a dynamic wetland. The tidal slough, this is a saltwater slough adjoining this property. At high tide in the last month, the water was totally to the top of the banks, the salt water from the bay, and it progresses inland to the west about a block and a half. So this is a very important area. This is not simply some stretch of the creek. This is not some area that is just, behind someone's apartment building or home. The area is in fact a wetland, a tidal slough, and a marsh which has been historically channelized and narrowed. The standards which the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Fish and Game place on wetlands, tidal sloughs, and marshes ought to be applied to this project to make it accurate. In addition, the plans of the Public Works Department, which have been presented here as flooding solutions, propose to divert some of the stormwater from Cordilleras Creek to Pulgas Creek Channel, which is this channel. This is not noted in the project. This particular project is a very small part of our major water and flooding issues. To allow this development with the encroachment onto the riparian area would set a very difficult problem in the future for any other flooding plans of a regional nature. I had brought this up in my comments to the Planning Commission. I didn't hear them brought up tonight. In addition, a hydrologist is to be hired to consult on this project. I would like to think that we would take this under consideration and not make a decision until the hydrologist report is submitted. It seems like we'd be cart before the horse if we made a decision and then had it fit. If you go out to the property, you'll see where at high tide the water recedes, it pulls the bank down with it, especially on the opposite side where it's ice plant, which is very heavy. Any hardening of the bank that would have to repair the creek bank would affect the area across and to the west, the property to the west. So I think it's almost impossible to not maintain a riparian setback of about 25 feet because a plant community will not develop in a narrow strip. We make a little narrow 5-foot strip and we can put some little ornamentals along it and irrigation. Well, they'll do fine, but native plants, they need a larger area in order to create the variety of plants and the seasonal considerations in their cycles. So I would recommend that you delay this until the hydrologist report is submitted as to the stability of the creek bank. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Olean?
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I think it's appropriate that this is Valentine's Day. My name is Addison Olean, first off, 1039 Hewitt Drive, San Carlos. The reason I think it's appropriate is because for the last 18 years, I've had the pleasure to know the family behind this project, and they do have a heart. Recently, I was asked, because of my marketing background, to assist in understanding this project as it relates to residents of San Carlos specifically, of whom I am one. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that this building will house inside it a beautiful museum quality lobby that will be for all the residents of San Carlos to enjoy. This will depict some of the great legacies that have taken place through the years with the Black Mountain Springwater family, and also how it's impacted San Carlos. I'd like to mention that the building itself is more than just another development. From my perspective, being a small business owner, this gives an opportunity to people like myself to find in San Carlos a place to do business that's highly desirable. And as you know, it's a very tough market from another perspective to find quality space. And then finally, I'd like to state that this is going to be a landmark building for people coming into the city from Britton Avenue. It'll be beautiful. It will provide a great gateway into the community, and I feel very proud of the fact that I've been involved with it on the periphery, and I'd like you to support it today from those perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Steve Mitchell?
Madam Mayor?
Would you mind pulling the microphone up? That way everyone
Madam
can hear
Mayor?
you. Yes, thank you.
Council members, my name is Steve Mitchell. I live at
1045 Hewitt Drive in San Carlos and have been a resident of San Carlos for 25-plus years. I've recently taken an interest in a particular building site and project as I've been involved in conversations with Black Mountain Properties regarding my future association with their organization. I feel that the owners have worked hard with the architects to develop an aesthetically pleasing building. I believe the proposed plan that is before you this evening makes good use of an underdeveloped site. It adds to the continued improvement and the look to the Britton Ave 101 entrance to the city of San Carlos, and I would urge the City Council to support this project tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Bob Paul. I apologize, Bob. I had you as, I couldn't read your writing. I thought you were 7A. Oh. So.
Hi, my name is Bob Paul, and I live at 21 Oak Creek Lane in San Carlos, and I've been there about 32 years. I'd like to first preface, I don't get this forum much, and I'd like to congratulate the city government of San Carlos because I think they've done a banner job in its growth and its leadership. And I think at one time when I first moved here, we were kind of the ugly duckling to our neighbors on the south, and it's nice to see that they want to move here now. So with that being said, along that same vein, I'd like to throw my support for the efforts with the Black Mountain Properties venture at 800 Britton. And I'm going to talk also in broad strokes because when I first moved here in 1972, Black Mountain Water was certainly a business to be proud of. I experienced everything from softball game supports to hiring kids during the summer and summer jobs, and it was always, I don't know how many people to this day still think a lot of their great product came out of this little prolific stream up in the San Carlos Mountains. And they did nothing to discourage that whole environmental issue. And so what I'd like to say is that I know personally the principals involved. I know personally very well the upper management involved. I know very well the contractor involved. And I have every confidence in the world that they're going to complete a project here that's going to be truly one that San Carlos will be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else from the public that would wish to speak? Come on up.
Sorry, I hadn't planned to speak. Horst Jung at 52 Coronado. I appreciate all the great things these gentlemen are saying. There is no question they ought to be entitled to build their building. I have no problem with that at all. What I think we should pay attention to is what's at stake here. And let them build the building and adhere to the standards we have set previously. We set standards for this city. Let's abide by it. There's nothing wrong with the building, but do it the way it should be done according to the standards and setbacks we have set some time ago. That's all, and the rest is okay. It's a great building, no problem. But I really kind of resent all this glad-handing about it. What a wonderful asset. Of course it's an asset, but let's abide by the rules. Why can't we do that? Why do we always have to compromise? That's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the public wishing to speak on this? I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. What's your pleasure?
I've got a quick question.
Okay.
With the importing of soil and the building up of the proposed pad for the building to be on, will this building be in a 100-year floodplain when it's done as proposed?
Madam Mayor, in response, the site will always be in the floodplain, but the building and the site will be raised above the 100-year flood level.
So it won't be required to get flood insurance? Not that you're an expert in flood insurance, I don't expect you to be.
It's not the plan.
In my experience, they still have to get insurance. It's just that
Well,
they
the
can
building
get
itself
the
is not
insurance
there.
because it's above the flood level. That's may not be a technical, that's not my area of expertise, but
I
that's
didn't
my
mean to put you in that
understanding.
spot. That's okay.
Well, Inga, I'll kick it off, is because we'd seen this project before in the year 2000. I think three of us saw it as members, either Planning Commission or whatever. And our role is to look at the the actions of the Planning Commission in dealing with, to me, really the only issue is the creek setback, is that all other items have been resolved. And can we make the findings indicated in a mitigated negative deck, and can we make the findings of the zoning ordinance? And for my edification in reviewing both, not only the old project but the current project, and that are the actions of the Planning Commission. And I just preface this by saying one of the caveats we've had here, and always saying, well, we're not following the rules. Well, the Planning Commission has interpreted this as an exception and diligently looked at it, and we've arrived at they have arrived at a fair-minded position of reaching those findings. And I, as looking back over their shoulders, having sat in that position for 5 years, saying I have to really be overwhelmed by an action to change that. So I find the actions of the Planning Commission in accordance with the current proposed environmental plans. We've heard about the setback, and I, for one, am prepared to support the Planning Commission's decision and approve the negative deck and the planned ordinance amendment, planned community ordinance amendment.
Okay. Don?
I generally agree with that. I think that, unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world, and I think that specifically on this issue of this 25-foot setback, first off, it's arbitrary. Not that it's bad, because generally it's good. But if we can have some habitat enhancement, if we can protect the top of the creek bank, if we can accomplish essentially those same goals while producing, coincidentally, an economic product in a market that's still very, very challenging, and we have experts telling us that we're still doing the right thing, and added to that, I have not seen any convincing evidence where I would want to reverse the Planning Commission. Again, I respect what those fine people do and all the homework that they do too, and I just can't see a way that I would want to reverse that given what's been presented. So I would be in favor of the proposal.
Okay. Tom?
Well, I hate to give up on the 25. I think it makes sense for the most part, but I am sort of troubled with I guess with the parcel. If this was a parcel that led from somewhere and went to somewhere, I think that would be certainly a mandate on our part to maintain the integrity of the corridor, the riparian corridor. But in fact, it doesn't. It stops at the freeway and it goes to the fence, and beyond the fence, there's another building with a roadway. So out of principle, I like the 25, but from a practical standpoint, it just doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. And not to belittle the riparian experts, I think you got to start somewhere. I think we have a rule, and I'd certainly like to hold to it. But if we held to it, what would we have? We would have a 25-foot stretch, maybe 100 or 150 feet, whatever this distance is, on private property. For their use, basically. And we could all say that we preserve 25 feet, but for what? And that's the problem I have. I think there's value in holding to the rules, and I certainly would like to do it, but the bottom line is I just don't see the advantage of compromising the development, which I think is attractive. The only possibility I could see would be to lop off that parcel over to or the improvement over toward Britain, which is on the picture to the left of the entrance, and that would compromise the development in terms of its economics, perhaps its ability to rent and be successful. So I'm not sure that's a fair request to preserve a strip of land that really starts nowhere and goes nowhere. So I think I'm compelled to approve the project. Somewhat to my regret on terms of the 25 feet.
You can make the findings.
Thanks for that sentiment, Tom.
Tom, you feel comfortable making a finding?
I can make the finding, sure.
Okay. Matt, do you have comments?
Yes, I do. First comment I'd make is I'm going to address some of the things my fellow council members have said to the point that Tom just made about two things. One, picking up a little bit of it's private property and that sort of thing. But if you look at California real estate law, it's understood that when you buy a piece of property that's on a riparian corridor, that's a public asset, and you need to respect it. And you don't have property rights to something that is of public benefit and a waterway, essentially. That's number one. Number two, in terms of it not going anywhere, well, it certainly isn't going to go anywhere if we keep allowing our ordinance to not be respected. And I'd give an example of, we put in bike lanes on Industrial Road. They don't go anywhere either. They stop at the Redwood City border, and you go north, and they stop at the Belmont border. That's it. And until Belmont and Redwood City get into the program for Industrial Road, the bike lanes will continue to go nowhere. And it's similar to this. If I didn't buy at all the argument in here that this is a minimal habitat and so forth. Of course it's minimal, because we've allowed development over the last, what are we, 75 years old as a city, or a little older? Over those 75 years, we've allowed development to encroach upon the creek. And at some point, and this is the conversation I had with Rich Gordon, we need to reverse that. And the county's looking at that and saying, we're going to start reversing that. We're not going to allow development, future development, to break these rules, because we want to have riparian corridors respected and an open space along there. So I think it's really unfortunate that we would, especially as one of the speakers pointed out, I think Caravant, we're involved in this. We're a partner. Part of it is our property. If anybody should be setting the example, it's the city. And I think it's really unfortunate that we would not do that tonight and allow this setback to be encroached upon. The last thing I'd say is that, well, actually two things. One, I've looked at the pictures that Tom has. There's habitat there already. If you start making room, it's amazing how quickly things can be restored and wildlife come back and live and actually adopt with our urban environment when you give wildlife the chance to do so. The fact that a 25-foot setback is arbitrary, it is not arbitrary. It's something that's been studied. Actually, the county has a 50-foot setback, and it's so that a creek can move back and forth a little bit. We've talked about erosion, and the applicant talked about putting in a riprap wall to prevent that erosion. Well, that's what a creek does. That's what a creek's supposed to do, and that's why you're supposed to give it some room to do that. And then my last comment is, I hear the saying that this will be a gateway project to the city of San Carlos architecturally. That's all fine and good, but I would ask us to also look at that riparian corridor. That's a gateway to the city as well as a riparian corridor goes. And I think we should respect that, and I think we should deny this application and not approve this.
Okay, Matt, thank you. I guess my comments are probably going to be in line with sort of more Tom's view on this, which is, you know, I certainly am a proponent of maintaining riparian corridor where we possibly can. Unfortunately, I look at the area that we're actually calling a riparian corridor, and to me it's a storm drainage culvert that's been, we can't even clean the weeds out of it in some cases, and that's really the use of these. I mean, these what are now creeks down in our urban environments on our industrial area have become, they've become glorified somehow as creeks, but they're not creeks. I mean, I gotten from Ms. Patterson, I love this picture. It's a fabulous picture of a meandering creek out in the middle of the forest. And I think, you know, that to me, I think that's where the 50-foot setback for the county comes from. Absolutely. You don't want to put anything nearby these things. But when you compare that with, you know, on three sides of a, you know, of the riparian corridor we're talking about is concrete and cars. I mean, it can't go anywhere. We can't ask the 101 to move back 25 feet. They're just not going to do that. So I think we need to be a little bit careful about when we start imposing these ordinances and be thoughtful about not imposing ordinances to the detriment of the economic viability of some of the projects, especially when they're bringing into town much-needed jobs, because we're trying to reduce the traffic situation. So while I wish that there was a win-win here, I just don't see it happening. Although I would like to encourage my fellow council members that maybe we should have think about a riparian committee that might be able to study riparian corridor renovation where it makes sense, and maybe some of the city parks are up in our hills and things like that. Because I think that we should be looking at how we can protect that asset within our community. But I'm prepared to be able to make the findings for both the mitigated negative declaration, it's getting late, sorry, as well as the findings for the zoning ordinance amendment. So, go ahead.
With that, I'd move to approve the mitigated negative deck for the property located at 800 Britton Avenue to include the mitigation monitoring plan, to include the 3 findings shown on pages 9 and 10 of the staff report. In addition, approval of the zoning ordinance amendment.
Do we have to do them separate?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mike, we need to do them separate.
Do them separately, and the first one is a resolution that's in the
Yes.
packet. So if you would just move to adopt the resolution, that'll be fine.
Okay. Then I'll move to move resolution 2005-112.
Based on the 3 findings contained within staff
All right,
report.
based upon the 3 findings.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Christine?
Councilmember King?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember David?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes.
Okay.
It's introduction of the
Yes.
ordinance.
I got to think the blue one, right? I
Yeah.
move to introduce ordinance number 1355, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos, adopting a plan of development for the purposes of constructing approximately 30,000 square foot building for office and light industrial uses at 800 Britton Avenue.
Based on the 4
Based
findings.
upon the 4 findings found on page 10 of the staff report.
Thank you, Mike.
Second.
Okay.
Councilmember King?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember David?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for coming out and sharing your evening, your Valentine's Day with us. The last item tonight is public comment. Oh, no?
No. You also have the sub-item that was with this,
The
was
approval
the
of the
amendment of the
development
disposition and development agreement.
Oh, did I miss that one?
Just a
Well, it's
housekeeping
the-
item.
I thought it was contained within the ordinance.
No, sir. That's a separate document, and you have a separate resolution for that.
All right.
And it's simply to amend the DDA in 2 respects to call for a 30,000 square foot building instead of 36.
Very last page, Mike.
Yep.
1,000 square foot building and a new schedule for performance by the developer.
Madam Mayor, I move to introduce resolution 2005-113.
Second.
Okay. Christine?
Councilmember King?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember David?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Mayor Teagle Doherty?
Yes. Okay. Now we can move on to public comment. Is there anyone else from the public that wishes to address us on an item not on the posted agenda? Keep in mind, it's Valentine's Day.
It is Valentine's, and that is
And
the
some of us,
that is the exact reason for a very short thing, which you can pick up on the way out. Many years ago, Mr. Falstich, who was the founder of Black Mountain, wrote a poem or a letter to his family about what love means and family and sharing. And it is, I think, the only thing that my father has of a client hanging on his wall through all the years. And I think if you take a moment to take it with you, you will treasure it as I have. So I wanted to leave that here for you, written by one of your residents many years ago, but still applicable today. Thank you.
wonderful. Thank you very much. Anyone else? And with that, we're adjourned.